But say on some of the issues concerning the study and teaching of Indian political thought, I think there are certain problems. In fact, some of the problems have been highlighted by the speakers also. But I think one very specific problem that we have to face as teachers of Indian political thought, and as students also, they have to face it. That is, whenever we talk of Indian political thought, somehow inevitably there comes in the question of, say, kind of contrasting Indian political thought and Western political thought. Contrasting in the sense, the way we study, the way we teach, the way we read Western political thinkers. Well, in the case of Indian political thought, I think we come across inevitably a problem. So there are lots of books, right from our student days, and I would like to highlight one point. This is known to, say, people of our generation. Maybe it's not known to teachers of today's generation. When we were students, for instance, then there was no such compulsory paper on Indian political thought. There was a full paper on Western political. That was a must, Western political thought. But no such paper on Indian political thought. In postgraduate classes of Calcutta University, there was a special paper, and there was hardly any taker of that. Indian political thought always remained very much marginalized. And one specific problem, I think, that is my first concern. That is, if you wish to study Indian political thought properly, in-depth study of Indian political thought, that requires the study of original sources. That, I think, is a major stumbling block for us. This is not the case in the case of Western political thought, for two reasons. In the case of Western political thought, in fact, all the major texts have been more or less translated in English. I am not saying everything, but most of them available in English. Secondly, in the West, the Western scholarship is such that those who actually work on Western political thought, in fact, say somebody is working on Machiavelli, for example, Felix Gilbert, for instance, Ernest Barker, for instance, on Greek political thought. Now, inevitably, in the West, the tradition is, and that is the Western scholarship, if you have to write something on Plato and Aristotle, you must study them in original Greek. If you want to work on Machiavelli, you must know Italian, Latin. Otherwise, you just cannot venture to write on these things. So that is how they have been trained. That is how the Western training is like that. In our country, that is the problem. So if you want to study, say, as Kim Suk was just very rightly saying, that medieval political thought, ancient political thought, somehow they have remained marginal. Why? One of the main reasons is we do not know the sources. We don't know Persian, we don't know Arabic, we don't know Sanskrit, we don't know Pali. So that is a major problem. So if one has to make, say, a proper in-depth study of Indian political thought, say whether it is ancient, or particularly in the case of ancient and medieval, then study of language, the study of sources, that has got to be encouraged, but that is not done. How to get out of it, I do not know. I am just raising the problem. And therein lies the contrast between Western political thought and Indian political thought. This is one. The other issue that has already been addressed by some of the speakers, but this is, I think, a very major problem. Say, when we talk about modern Indian political thought, there are so many, say, thinkers, and we consider them as thinkers. That is why, since they are thinkers, so they have got some thought. So, or if you say, because they have got some contributed to the thought, so they are thinkers. The point is that if you look at the names, you will find most of them, barring a few, well, most of them with some exceptions, well, they are primarily political activists. And this is another contrast with the West. So when you are, say, studying Hobbes, for example, Hobbes' political theory, Locke's political theory, thought, whatever, or say Hegel, they were essentially political philosophers. Political philosophers, thinkers, whatever. And so they developed in their own way some structure of ideas, systems, etc. So they lived in a world of thought. Many of them were professional, say, teachers, university scholars, like that. Yes, some of them were definitely active. Marx, for example, was an activist, sure. Machiavelli, to a large extent, was associated with, say, direct politics. So there were some exceptions, but by and large, all the thinkers who we read actually, well, they were in their own ways, they were thinkers. Thinkers were quote unquote thinkers. Maybe big, maybe small. But in our case, say when we are talking of Nehru, for example, I sometimes have doubt. Can we really characterize Nehru as a thinker? He was definitely an activist, contributed a lot to, say, Indian political movement. Say, he had his own thoughts on India, but when you are, say, referring to someone as a thinker, that means you have developed certain theoretical concepts. In the case of Gandhi, of course, there is an exception. But not everything of Gandhi, but Gandhi was also essentially an activist. So from activism, when you generate, say, some concepts, some ideas, so that is one kind of thinking. Somehow, I think, there comes in some problems. And this is another contrast with the West.
Coming to the book, I'll be very specific because this has indeed been a very long journey. This has been almost 2 years, 2.5 years from the time we started with the project. Frankly, I don't have any hesitation to confess that I'm not a competent editor. I'm not a competent editor, neither did I edit this book very skillfully. But what I did is, I knew my professors and teachers who have been working on certain areas for years, and I was hoping that they would contribute in this book so that I can capture their expertise, their erudite scholarship for our next generation of students. They will be really benefited from this book, as because we have a lucid language as well as the articles all been written by extremely scholarly articles written for the sake of students, for the purpose of our students, and I think this is really a good thing that has happened with this book. So we have so many articles, almost 26 articles written by 19 eminent scholars and professors of Calcutta University, Jadavpur University, Rabindra Bharati University, and leading colleges like Brabant, Bethune. About the book, let me just mention a few points. What really came to my mind is that I was just over some last year, I was just talking to a publishing house who had come to our college, and they were insisting on writing a book on Indian political thought. So what I was discussing with them is that my my viewpoint has been like, for teaching for the last 18-19 years in a college, I found that this is a paper which we have in third year, and we found that mostly our students, they relate the ideas, they relate thinkers and to a particular phase, that's the nationalist movement, in respect to the nationalist movement, freedom struggle, partition. So they kind of think them as a part of the entire nationalist freedom struggle and movement. But what remains untrapped is that there's a realm of ideas, ideas which is a part of the greater political philosophy, ideas which are universal, ideas they have talked about in terms of society, in terms of individual, as I have portrayed in the introduction, that this is what is most important, what an individual thinks in a society. How is the thought of an individual being conditioned by the socio-economic forces? So I have referred to as Gunnar Myrdal and the quotation from Asian drama, where he has shown that how scientists, social scientists should be more critical towards understanding individuals in a society in terms of how they think, how they feel, how they behave, and to what consequences they feel, they think and behave. So that was the central thing, that ideas are a part which is universal and which has to be kind of studied as part of greater political philosophy, rather than emphasizing on these leaders and their role only as part of the nationalist movement. So with that emphasis in mind, I have elaborated the book and I have taken certain key themes, the political, which has arisen in the contemporary political scenario. Like you will see, I have talked about empowerment, ecology, human rights, women's rights, sustainable development, globalization, civil society. So all these things, all these concepts have been viewed, keeping in mind that these ideas are not new, not something that we have borrowed from the West, but these ideas were already present in the minds of our thinkers, and they were uncritical about, they did not uncritically accepted the Western ideas of these concepts, but kind of indigenized them in our own society in their own ways. So that is exactly the plane, the phase that I wanted to capture in this book.
The theory of state that you find in Kautilya is only one theory of state. It's not the Hindu theory of state or the pre-Islamic theory of state. It went through many readings. Kautilya is 3rd century BC. Manu surely is not AD. So does that mean Indians stopped thinking after these two thinkers? It is a huge yawning gap that is left behind in the way our political science has, our political thinking has been seen by political scientists and historians alike. Why is it important to have thinkers from ancient India and medieval India represented? I'll tell you why a person like Abul Fazl needs to be studied, and why therefore many other thinkers from the period before that, Katyayan, Bodhayan, they need to be studied. Zia Barani, there has been an attempt. There is no attempt at studying Abdul Qadir Badauni. With these are names we are familiar with. We are not familiar with their ideas, although much of the political experience on which the British built their colonial empire in India is structured upon those thinking traditions which inhabited this peninsular region of ours. We have virtually been unmindful of it. What the state is supposed to be, what are the duties of the state, have occasioned debates in India down the ages. There was no India, even at a time when there was no India. And there were small states that together were subsumed eventually into making the larger political whole. The concept of a state, is it a modern Western concept that we use? Or do we have parallels? These are issues that a student should be familiar with, that these were debated that there were extensive discussions on what constitutes a state, who is a citizen, what are the rights and entitlements of a citizen vis-a-vis the ruler, what are the duties and obligations of the ruler vis-a-vis the citizens. These are questions that have been discussed extensively in the Indian past by thinkers across different political traditions. Hardly any of them were rulers. Rulers seldom think, as you would know, living in this democratic country of ours.
The point is that when you are talking about, when you are reappreciating the contributions of a past stalwart, intellectual stalwart, the question that has been coming up for over the last couple of hours. Yes, Ram Mohan Roy, when his bicentenary was celebrated in 1972, immediately following, within 2-3 years, there was a book edited by V.C. Joshi, and there was an outpouring. It was a very, very harsh critic of Ram Mohan Roy because it was they were the early days of revolution in our society. And there was a strong criticism that Ram Mohan Roy was not nationalist. He was not enough harsh on the British rulers. He should have called for ouster British rule in India, but he has not done enough on that. So it's our task to expose his feet of clay. Now those days of revolution have receded somewhat. Now we are in the days of civil society activism. So I have tried to argue that Ram Mohan Roy can very well be projected as a kind of pioneer in that field. That is, even under the state of colonial rule, there may be kind of theoretical contradiction. But even under those days, it was Ram Mohan's attempt, very sincere attempt, to establish some contours of civil society in India. And he felt, or that's the argument goes, that was a very important precondition for paving any kind of national liberation movement in India. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar is once again, this book is called Book on Indian Political Thought. I ignore for the present whether it's political thought in India or Indian political thought. But Vidyasagar is included usually under the social hate rather than political hate. But once again, as I argued with Ram Mohan, Vidyasagar also contributed in his own way towards the building and sustenance of that kind of civil society activism. It was not really activism, but sustenance of the civil society in India. And last but not the least, there is a chapter on 3 women scholars come activists, Tarabai Shinde, Ramabai, and Shaurya Devi Chaudhurani, who very effectively, the author has argued that they have put the banner of revolt, kind of feminist revolt. I don't agree with this feminist level always, but the point is, just to make one issue, that Vidyasagar is often projected as the champion of women's liberation. For example, widow remarriage is projected as one of his foremost achievements or his attempts. Ramabai challenged the idea that what is good for women, widow remarriage or educating the widows, women's education, what is more important? So this is a very important question raised by a lady belonging to that age who expired in 1922.
Political ideas. And there are certain political ideas, the idea of justice, the idea of democracy, the idea of human rights, the idea of development, etc., etc. I think I can go on, naming the various ideas, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Which, of course, at a particular point in history, they probably have a certain meaning, But even within that, they contain, I'm talking about the basic core of these ideas are universal and they're applicable to all ages and societies. So therefore, their relevance is never lost.
Like she has expressed the word Indiana. She tried to somehow bind all these articles within the concept of Indiana. She has successfully done it. Though I have not read right now, I know that from the content of the book, even from the smell of the book, I can say that Indiana has been practiced. You know, this Indiana concept was of whose? It was Satish Chandra Mukherjee who used to run this Dawn magazine, where there was a systematic column called Indiana. That he was binding both Western and Eastern knowledge together, assimilating the Western thought within Indiana for nation building purpose. So I don't know whether consciously or unconsciously she used this term, but very well appropriate. You become a true successor to Satish Mukherjee's dream of building modern India. That is there.
And most important is that Dr. Lopamudra Sengupta has presented a copy of this book to our departmental library. This will benefit our students as well as our faculty members a lot, because this book is connected with, the content of the book is connected with our syllabus, both undergraduate and postgraduate syllabus, and also those who are doing research at MPhil and PhD levels, they will also be benefited a lot. For that particular reason, I again extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Lopamudra Sengupta.